Hello, hello. Hi, Evelina. Hi, everyone. I was just going to introduce today's topic. So, kind of following from last week, where Evelina, you were telling us some really interesting information about salt and how that relates to other processes in the body. And so today we're going to be talking about sugar, right? Sugar.
Yeah, and I can't believe it is episode 16. So, episode 16 on sugar and the myths surrounding it. So, yeah, very interesting. So, Valentina, I know that you've done quite a lot of research about how sugar affects the body and a lot of myths surrounding it. So, tell me, what are some of the insights that people usually find the most surprising about sugar?
Yeah, so I guess myth number one really is that sugar affects us all in the same way and affects even individuals the same way on different days. So different people will have a different relationship with sugar in their body. So what will kind of produce a glucose spike for one person may not for another, and vice versa. And it's really just as a bit of background, the obviously consuming too much sugar can lead to weight gain and diabetes, insulin resistance, and things like that. But the foundation of what happens there, or kind of where the problems start, is when we have glucose spikes in our blood sugar. So when our blood sugar levels spike and go above a certain threshold. And different people will have a different level of insulin sensitivity, will have a different metabolism, and so the rate at which you're burning calories and using the energy that you're putting into your body. And also will different types of hormones and at different times will affect how sensitive our bodies are to insulin. So insulin is the hormone that tells our body, hold on, that's too much sugar you've just eaten. We can't put all of that straight in the blood. That's going to cause some nerve damage and all sorts. So we're going to store some of that as energy in our cells. And that insulin sensitivity can vary between people. So depending on the different hormones in your body. So often we find that women are less sensitive to insulin because of the particular complex of hormones that women tend to have in their bodies versus men, but that also can really vary.
Mhm.
But essentially, what you want to look out for to know that you have had a spike in glucose is that you'll kind of might have a peak of energy and then a trough, and you'll have a slump afterwards. You might experience some brain fog, and you could even feel a bit more irritable, and have lower mood kind of an hour or a few hours after this having something sugary. And that will kind of let you know that you have experienced an insulin spike. If you eat something and you don't experience any of those symptoms, while you may have spiked your your glucose slightly, it's less likely that you would have had such a severe spike. So that's a really useful way of getting to know
Mhm.
your individual levels. What I found really interesting is so for women, in the time just before our period and during the first couple of days, we are actually a lot more sensitive to sugar. So,
Mhm.
a big part of why you experience cravings when you're on your period is because you're actually going through this roller coaster. So, cravings, that's another sign that you've experienced a glucose spike. It's because we're more likely to be going through this up and down roller coaster because it's actually our kind of menstrual hormones of estrogen and progesterone that can change how sensitive we are to insulin. And when we are about to come on our periods, then that's when we become less sensitive to insulin, which means we're more likely to have a glucose spike from eating the exact same types of food that we might have, say, a week before or a week afterwards, and actually not experience any of these problems. Um, so I found that really interesting. And just one more kind of part of that complex really is that even depending on our moods and emotional state and those hormones, that will also affect our insulin sensitivity. So when we have elevated cortisol and adrenaline, if we're in stressful situations, that actually inhibits the productivity of insulin as well. So that the more stressed we are, the more likely we are to have a glucose spike from eating the same foods that we might actually not have a glucose spike from if we were eating them in a relaxed setting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think definitely there's this kind of overarching myth in some way that sugar in itself is bad, right? But that's not the case. I think it's how we process sugar, how our body reacts to it, that can either cause some bad health impact and so on. But sugar in itself it's such an important part of our body's metabolism. It's energy, right? So it's really needed. It's just the fact that the way we eat and the way we are out of sync with nature, with our bodies, that we are not aware of what we're supposed to be eating and how and when, right? So yeah, what are kind of your thoughts on sugar, good or bad, and why those spikes in insulin and spikes in glucose or blood sugar in that way? Why is that a bad thing, right? And then what we can do to prevent this from happening?
So I think that's a really good question, right? So is sugar good or bad? And I think that's kind of the second myth here, really, that sugar is bad. Sugar comes in all sorts of different forms, and it's how we eat it that makes it a good or a bad thing in our lives. So whether we need sugar, we need energy in our bodies to do a lot of our processes, but we don't want to be having, so the glucose spike is bad because it increases inflammation in the body, and then inflammation leads to a lot of other, aging of all of your organs, your skin. It has nerve damage. You can have a lot of nerve damage as well from spiked blood glucose, which can affect your brain processes. So if you have consistent spikes in blood sugar and in blood glucose, then that will affect and damage the neurons in your brain. You can also experience, that's why if you have diabetes, then you can experience lack of sensitivity in your feet and your hands, and it's because of that nerve damage. But yeah, so we want to avoid that, but we can still eat sugar. It's okay to do it. But we just need to remember a couple of principles. So we want to be having, at the same time as we eat sugar, or ideally beforehand, we want to be eating fiber, fat, and protein. And what that does, and specifically in that order, if we can. So what that does is it slows down the digestion and the processing of carbohydrates and sugars in the body. So rather than kind of all of the sugar coming in at once and your blood sugar spiking like that and then suddenly dropping, you kind of have this slower incline and a flatter curve there. So it gets released over a longer time, and you have steadier energy levels, lower spikes, and then you don't have the same complications that kind of come from that. Another useful thing to remember is that we don't need added sugar. I think we've all kind of been acclimatized to having a sweeter diet because it's an easy way for companies to make food seem tastier and to make it more attractive to us, because we're biologically determined to want to seek high energy levels in our food. But we don't need to add sugar to things, and changing that actually isn't as hard as it sounds, because if you have a sugar addiction, then you think, well, what, I'm gonna just eat bland food for the rest of my life? Don't want to do that. But actually our tastes change, so the less sugar you eat, the less you actually do want to eat it, and the sweeter things will taste that don't have a lot of sugar in them. So
and it's very interesting that, as well, just on that point, that, I eat very little sugar and very little salt. Like I never add it to, I don't know, coffee and food and so on. And it's interesting that some of these kind of cravings for sugar, they vary based on what you said as well, like some other things that we eat. And if we have a very well-rounded diet with right amount of proteins and fats and so on, we don't actually have these sugar cravings, because if we train our body to metabolize energy from variety of foods over a period of time, we are not desperate for this spike of insulin to give us that boost of energy, to release that blood sugar in order for us to perform, essentially, right? To have that energy. So body's metabolism also changes on a lot of other factors in our body, including the diet, exercise, hormone cycles, and so on. And people are thinking that, okay, if I have sugar cravings, or if I, okay, what happens if I just stop eating sugar, right? When you say like sugar addictions and so on, and people just cut sugar. But actually, if we look at all the kind of underlying causes of why you have those cravings in the first place, and what are some of those processes and imbalances in your body from nutritional point of view, from metabolism point of view, from hormonal point of view, and if you correct those, then it's most likely that not eating sugar is not going to be a torture anymore, and it's most likely that you're not going to have those cravings. So it's kind of addressing the underlying cause of it, rather than just kind of trying to fight the issue head on. Because if you're craving that sugar, your body's telling you something, right? Your body needs that energy. There are some processes that are dependent on that energy, but is there a different way of kind of satisfying and correcting those processes, so we are not having those huge glucose spikes and fluctuations that are causing such a big damage to our bodies, right?
Exactly. That's a really good point. And I think that's, we often, and it's kind of another myth here, is that, sugar is the only source of energy, or we often think, oh, if I'm feeling tired, I should have something sugary to pick me up. And that's not going to help. It might give you an immediate kind of spike of energy, but that will very quickly kind of crash, and then you'll still just be in this roller coaster of up and down. And you're right, so we can change, we should want to be changing our body's relationship with different food groups, so that we can process energies and utilize energies from fats as well. And by altering our diet so that we have more of a balanced set of food groups in there. And I think it's quite important as well to recognize that includes snacks as well as meals. So even having a snack, it's fine to have a snack. I'm not anti-snacking. But you want to be having, even the snack should be balanced. So let's say you feel like a piece of toast in the middle of the afternoon. That's fine. Have a piece of toast, but just have it with some butter or olive oil and some peanut butter, or something that has fat and protein and fiber. So peanut butter is quite a good one because it has all three of those. But you can also have kind of avocado, seeds, some chickpeas or halloumi, whatever you have in your cupboard, and however you can put that together to mean that you're ticking the box of, so the bread is going to be the sugars here. And then you'll have kind of butter, olive oil, whatever, it's fats, proteins, and fibers. But yeah, so when we eat sugar in that way, that's when we'll benefit from the energy the most. And it's also when we'll be taking energy and processing it more easily from the fats as well in our diet.
And what is interesting there as well, that, it's not only kind of what we eat and how we combine some of those foods, but also when we eat. Because I noticed a very, very big difference when I started doing intermittent fasting. It also completely changes how your body metabolizes foods, and having longer periods of time without food actually trains your body to be much more energy efficient in both kind of energy production and storage, but also the metabolism of kind of metabolizing the energy from your storage in the cells in that way. And definitely it's something that helps not to have those cravings, and also not to have those kind of slumps of energy as soon as you've eaten the food that, now your body is taking too much energy to process all of this. So definitely intermittent fasting and kind of increasing the amount of hours in a day when you are not eating is really, really helpful to kind of correct some of these unhealthy processes of metabolism. But there's very interesting research that shows that there are specific times when actually we want to have a glucose spike in our bloodstream. Do you know when that is?
You tell me.
So this is before we are stressed. And this is the key, that is before, not only when we are stressed, because as you know, that the stress response, and we were talking about this last time, there's so many different processes that are being affected by our HPA axis, by a variety of our hormones that are being released in our body. And one of the key elements of that when we are stressed, that this kind of fight-flight mechanism also needs this energy to be used for fighting a threat, right? Or overcoming an obstacle. So as part of that, definitely there is a lot of sugar, that is a lot of glucose that is being released into our bloodstream as part of this stress response. So this of course causes a lot of cardiovascular diseases and so on if we're having this all the time. And it affects our immune system, because now you are actually depleting all of the storage of your energy reserves in your cells, right? So now cells don't have that amount of energy to, let's say, repair, reproduce, for immunity, for a lot of other processes for recovery. But if we have a dose of sugar before we are about to get stressed, now the sensors are already showing that there is a large amount of sugar in our bloodstream. There is enough of energy reserve to actually utilize it for this fight or whatever that is that we are facing in front of us. And it doesn't actually deplete the cell storage, which means that it doesn't deplete all of it doesn't have the same detrimental effect on our immunity and recovery. So as you know, that people who, let's say, run marathons, or, when you have something stressful, when you work for a period of time and your immunity is quite high at that moment, but as soon as you stop, then you get sick, because, that's when all of your kind of reserves being depleted. So we can have that sugar very strategically at the very specific times before we get stressed, to prevent that from happening.
Wow, that is so interesting. And I've definitely, learned something there. And I'll try and kind of bring that into my anticipation of stressful times. And one last thing, but just before we finish, about sugar, is that I think it can be useful to recognize that. So the myth is that that there are good sugars and bad sugars, and that sweeteners are better than sugar. Just in the interest of time, honey, agave, it's all the same. It still spikes your insulin, or it spikes your blood glucose, and encourages insulin resistance over time, which is what happens when we spike our glucose and insulin over and over again. And also sweeteners, the body responds in the same way.
And sweeteners are also carcinogenic, so there are a lot of other effects. So it's better to eat natural sugars in a small amount, rather than having all of these other cocktails of all of the other chemically produced artificial sweeteners and so on. So yeah.
And not to mention what they do to your gut bacteria.
Great. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Valentina, for sharing. And yeah, it's I'm sure it's such a big topic. We could continue talking about this all day long. We'd love to hear some questions from you guys. So please feel free to drop in your comments and notes, and we will respond to those.
Thanks very much.